All right, whiskey dinners. They sure sound fancy, but do they actually work? Spoiler alert, not really. In this episode of Bottles and Bites Without Borders, we break down why pairing straight whiskey with a multi-course meal is a recipe for disaster.
Welcome to Bottles and Bites Without Borders, where every sip and every bite tell a story. Rob is your host. Each week, he will take you on a delicious journey, from vineyard tales and distillery secrets to culinary traditions. So, grab a favorite drink, a plate of something tasty, and join us for another adventure with Bottles and Bites.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks so much for stopping by for another episode. As you can tell by my intro and the title of this episode, Why Whiskey Dinners Don't Work, I'm going to dive into all the reasons, and it's actually just 5 reasons as to why, and it's not my opinion. These are kind of facts as to why whiskey dinners don't work. Now, notice I'm saying dinners. I'm not saying, and by the way, let me start with this. I am a huge fan of whiskey. Big into bourbon, really been enjoying some Scotch and Irish whiskeys, love rums, so all kinds of spirits. And I'm not opposed to you telling me that you can find a food that would go with a pour of a whiskey, whether it be primarily a Scotch and bourbon is really what we're talking about here. I'm not going to argue that point with you at all. But more and more in my market, I'm in Houston, I'm seeing whiskey dinners. I mean, when you think about a wine dinner, we think about this elevated kind of 4 or 5 course meal, not just bites, that are paired with, 4 or 5 different wines. And I love these kind of things. I mean, I think they're great if it's the right wines with the right food. And again, for the right price, I enjoy, partaking in these, having that experience. But more and more over the last couple of years, and I've voiced this a few times, I'm seeing it so much that I had to, come on and actually do an episode about this. I just don't think whiskey dinners make sense. And I think they're a bit of a sham, a marketing ploy, if you will, to get the dollars of whiskey lovers, and it's working. Let's start by saying, when you have food, there is a purpose behind having a liquid to go along with that food. Whether you're drinking water, whether you're drinking milk, orange juice, wine, beer, whiskey, if you're having food, that particular beverage should help in enjoying the food and, cleansing your palate. That's the main reason, to be a palate cleanser, to get ready for that next bite of food. But a little bit more than that, we would hope that it's also an enhancer, that it works with the food in a way that it makes the food taste a little better, but it also might make, that liquid, that beverage taste a little better. And the easiest way to do this comparison is with wine, right? Because that's where this kind of stems from. In the market, they see these wine dinners going on. They see people paying $100 to $200 to $300, sometimes more than that, per person to come and enjoy a 4 or 5 course meal with a pour, probably a 2-ounce pour of 4 to 5 wines to accompany those dishes. And I don't blame the whiskey folks, the restaurants that have a great whiskey selection, for saying, hey, hold on a second, are we missing out on something? And trying to put together, or not actually trying, they're actually putting together their whiskey dinners. And, do as they want. I have no problem with that. The issue I have is, and maybe not so much an issue as call this a public service announcement, or call this maybe some of you are going bull crap. It's just a flat out complaint. It might be that too, because it just doesn't work and it really doesn't make sense to do it. And I'm going to give you 5 reasons why, and actually 5 facts as to why this doesn't work. And again, at the end, I'm going to give you some whiskey and food pairings that do work, that you can enjoy. There's places you can slide in a little pour to go with a bite or two of food. But as a meal, as a dinner, whiskey does not work with food. And just to kind of put it in simple terms, let's think about things that we eat that go together, that we go, when I have a bite and then I have a drink, it really works. You could think about pizza and a beer if you wanted to, or pizza and a Coke, or sometimes a burger and a Coke go really well together. Let's say anything sweet in a glass of milk, a slice of chocolate cake, some chocolate chip cookies and milk. I don't think you would ever meet a person that says, hey, you know what? This time I'm grabbing 3 chocolate chip cookies and push that milk out of the way. Give me a tall glass of OJ to go with these cookies. Nobody's going to do that. That's too much sugar on sugar. Doesn't work, right? So when we think about food, let's just kind of talking about sweets and milk. Not even sweet so much, but breakfast. Let's stay in the breakfast category. There's certain drinks that you have, and they're usually some type of juice, whether it's an orange juice, apple juice, grapefruit juice, or milk, that you typically would associate with breakfast. Now, some of you might be going coffee. We like to have coffee in those morning hours. I don't know that, I'm a huge coffee drinker. I'm down the rabbit hole, but I don't necessarily want a cup of coffee with my food. I either like it before or I like it after breakfast. So that's where I'm at in the coffee, just so I make that point. But there's certain foods that when you think stack of pancakes, a glass of milk is going to, go so much better, make you enjoy the bite and the cleansing of your palate so much better than, a stack of pancakes and orange juice. You get what I'm saying? The other meals that we have throughout the day are the same way, right? Nobody goes out to lunch and says, hey, I want a burger. I want some of those tater tots, and I want a tall glass of milk. It just usually doesn't happen. You're going to go tea. You're going to go a Coke of some type. You may go water, which is what I usually do. That's perfectly fine. But you get my point. I mean, the point is you may not think about it, but there are absolutely drinks that in your mind, work with those foods, and that's what you want to have. It makes the drink and the food more enjoyable when you put them together. And so when we move into those of us who partake in alcohol, and again, said it early on, huge whiskey fan. And I'll just run down kind of my routine on a weekend when I'm cooking a dinner for drinking. My routine for drinking is this. I love to have a pour or two of whiskey as I'm prepping and cooking for a Friday night or Saturday night dinner with friends or family coming over. I think a whiskey is absolutely delicious. It's a good aperitif, and that's where I like to have it, just kind of sipping. There might be a charcuterie board out or something. I might pick at some nuts or a little bit of cheese or something, and I think that's fine with a whiskey. After that, when the meal is ready to be served, man, I am switching to wine. Wine is something that is made to go with food, and I'm going to take full advantage of that. And then after dinner, I may shift back, or not may, I usually shift back to either a wine either to a whiskey or a fortified wine, or sometimes a cognac or an Armagnac or something like that for that late night, after dinner pour, if you will. And that's kind of my progression for an evening. But to me, when you get into spirits and you get into wine, part of that journey should be understanding, I say when you should drink those, meaning with food, without food. And if you are going to have them with a bite of something, appropriately pairing those things together. And, my big gripe for this episode is whiskey dinners. I've seen so many whiskey bars, restaurants that have, lean more towards whiskey and beer versus, having some kind of a wine list, really pushing these whiskey dinners. And we're talking, and let me just say, if you want to do a whiskey tasting at a at a whiskey bar, at a restaurant that leans heavy to a great selection of whiskey, I'm down, man. I would love to go do that. And, sometimes those tastings could be a lot of fun. It could be being able to taste through a portfolio of a particular producer that maybe you've had a couple of theirs, but not all of them. It could be some luxury brands that are hard to get, that in this particular tasting, they're putting 4 or 5 of these pours in front of you and letting you try them. And sometimes that's what these are, but they're pairing them with a meal, meaning you're having plates of food just like you would a regular dinner, and they're changing the pour each dish and saying, here's how these work together. And I'm just calling BS on that. It just doesn't work. And let's get into the top 5 reasons why these don't work. First of all, whiskey overpowers food for the most part. I mean, like I said, in bites, you can do it. But as a general statement, this is absolutely 100% true. Unlike wine, which has acidity to cleanse the palate and complement the food, whiskey is high in alcohol. Typically, on the lower end, you're going to see the alcohol level at 40%, ABV, so 80 proof. And that's at the low end. Typically, if you're talking about bourbon lovers, and that's usually where I see these whiskey dinners happening, is in the bourbon world. I would tell you that I might not have such a hard position on this if you told me, wait, we're doing this with scotch. I might see where that might work a little bit better, but still not a dinner. Because let's think about this. Well, let me finish the statement. So we know that the alcohol is 80% on the lower end and goes up well over 100, 120 proof on a lot of these bourbons. That level of intensity can easily dominate most dishes. Dueling flavors rather than enhancing them. And you definitely want, as I said earlier on, the wine or the drink that you're having and the food to enhance one another. On their own, they're good, but together they're great. That's what you're hoping for when you do pairings. And especially when you're doing something that you're specifically pairing these, I should get that outcome, and it's just not going to happen. So that's number 1. Whiskey overpowers food. Number 2, palate fatigue. You're going to get it. First of all, these whiskey dinners probably last an hour, hour and a half. I'm not sure. I've never been to one, what the pours are, but a standard pour of whiskey is between 1 and 2 ounces. You might get 1, you might get 1.5, you might get 2. And this is a sipping beverage, very small sips over a period of time, a good period of time. Now you're asking me to have 4 or 5 pours in a very short amount of time. I'm going to get palate fatigue. I just am. The alcohol content in whiskey, it numbs the palate over time, making it difficult to appreciate subtle flavors in both the whiskey and in the food. If you think about wine, if you think about beer, cocktails, they all have a lower ABV, alcohol by volume. So they work better because they allow for more dynamic tasting experience. Your palate's not going to get as tired. So it just makes sense. That's number 2. Number 3, lack of refreshment. And if you ever heard, our shows and we talk about wine a lot, and the most important thing in wine to think about when you're pairing it with food is that level of acidity. And that's because it cleanses the palate. So when we talk about refreshing, cleansing, the palate. So lack of refreshment with whiskey, it just is. Whiskey doesn't have that crispness, the effervescence that makes beverages like wine, beer, or even cocktails great for pairing. It lacks acidity and carbonation, which are essential for cutting through fat and richness in food. So there's your reason number 3. So let's recap real quick. Number 1, whiskey overpowers food. Number 2, palate fatigue. Number 3, lack of refreshment. And let's go to number 4. Number 4 is temperature matters, right? Most whiskey, especially when you're getting to the level of whiskey dinners. The last thing any whiskey lover wants you to do, or bourbon lover, is to dilute that down. Now you're getting into that cocktail world, which changes things. So we know we're going to have the whiskey served at neat, which means no dilution, which doesn't offer the temperature contrast that can make pairings exciting. In contrast, wine is served at varying temperatures to highlight flavors and refresh the palate. So temperature absolutely matters. When you get that constant room type temperature, if you think about whiskey and you see it in a bar, it's always up on the shelf. There is no, cooling it or anything. It's at room temperature. So makes a big, big difference. Reason number 5, sweetness mismatch. Okay. Many whiskeys, especially bourbons, have strong caramel, vanilla, and spice notes that can conflict with the savory dishes that you might be eating. They tend to work better with desserts or rich or smoky flavors rather than a full course meal. I mean, it's just a fact. And that's kind of my point. I've made mention early that you can have a bite or two and have a whiskey. You can have a charcuterie board. By the way, let's go through and give you kind of what I think could work when whiskey does work with some food. And I'm not saying that you couldn't, as part of a meal or an experience that you're doing with friends at your house having a dinner, mix in a bite of something with the whiskey that you want people to try. That to me is perfectly acceptable. I just don't like this notion that whiskey dinners are a thing, and, creating a menu of a 5-course meal with 5 different pours of whiskey, that the food and whiskey, having them together is going to, create this experience that you're absolutely going to love. That's where I call bullcrap. It just does not happen. Okay. There are times when whiskey can work with bites of food. So you can enjoy it in a dinner setting when used sparingly, like I just said. Like a single pour with a specific dish, bourbon can go really good with barbecue, or smoky scotch can go really good with blue cheese. Whiskey cocktails could be something that you want to design to complement the meal better than just straight pours. I totally get where there's this lure of whiskey dinners, right? I mean, it sounds really cool. On its face, it sounds like something that could be a very unique experience. And it could be, something that offers an opportunity to showcase a wider range of flavors, from smoky to peaty to sweet to spiced in the whiskeys. And that's where it gets back to what I said earlier on, which is I'm all for whiskey tastings. There's an event here in Houston that is done. This past year was the 9th annual Houston Whiskey Social. That kind of a tasting event where they just have food out for the purpose of, keeping you some food in your belly to absorb what you're sipping on as you go through the whiskey social, because they've got, a few hundred different whiskeys that you can sample. Finding an experience like that and spending, I think it's $150 to go to this event. You've got, like I said, 300 to 400 pours of whiskey that you could, by no means would you ever sample all of those, but that you could pick and choose kind of how you want to navigate the social that night. That to me is a way to spend your money way better than going to a whiskey dinner for a few reasons. One, typically whiskey dinners, from what I've seen, and I've seen these flyers come out, it's usually one brand and it's going through their portfolio. So once you kind of get that profile of the first or second pour, I mean, it'd have to be something like Buffalo Trace, where they're doing like a Pappy, lineup or something like that, where it's really luxury, really kind of unicorn type pours, for it to be something I might be interested in. Other than that, I would rather experience almost the same bite with 2 or 3 different pours from different, whether it be types of whiskey, Irish, Scotch, bourbon, Indian, whatever it might be, versus one straight profile all night long. I have the same gripe, just so you know, with wine dinners. I prefer wine dinners that highlight multiple producers, multiple styles in wine versus the portfolio of one winemaker. I just do. And it could be a me thing. Most people may disagree with me, but if I understand your profile, I get it. I don't need to drink 4 more wines subtly different, but with the same kind of foundational profile. I don't want that. Don't need that. That's just me. You do you. So I get why there's this lure of whiskey dinners. It's a new thing. It's not as popular. It's not been around like wine dinners have. And so with the, this love of bourbon right now, we call it the bourbon craze. I see where people are doing this, but part of my other issue is, we all live on social media now, and we see these posts that went to the whiskey dinner at such and such. Great experience. The food and whiskey pairings were magical. Really and I'm going, you guys are full of it. I mean, there's nobody who can tell me. Well, and let's talk about this. We mentioned a little while ago that whiskey is designed to be sipped on, right? You don't do shots. You don't throw it back. It's a very slow sipper. 2 things. Are you going to go through that amount of whiskey to try to refresh your palate every time you take a bite to get ready for that next bite? We already know it doesn't work, but that would, in theory, be what you have to do. Secondly, when you do that with wine or any other drink, you put enough liquid in your mouth to be able to coat your mouth and be able to, use the acidity and everything, let's just say wine, to cleanse your palate. Whiskey, we just said, is a sipping beverage. There's no way you would get enough of that liquid in your mouth to do what, you would think it needs to do. I'm ranting a little. It just frustrates me that people think this is a thing and it works. It just doesn't. We gave you the 5 reasons why it doesn't work. I would love to hear from folks. If you think I'm wrong, if you think I'm missing something, if you think whiskey and food go together and complement one another and enhance the experience and flavors in each one, I want to know about it. Hit us up on our socials, send me a message to the show, because I just don't see it, but I do see these becoming more and more popular. And I see people dropping $200-$300 to go to these events, these whiskey dinners. And I just couldn't take it anymore, man. I had to get on the show and say something because I don't want to say it's out of control. People can do with what they want, but there needs to be a voice out there that says, you're making a mistake. You're not getting what you think you're getting. It's, to me, kind of like if you've ever, if you love a wine or a particular bourbon or spirit and it's because on the front of the label, right? You read the label and you go, everybody thinks this is fantastic. So when you see it, you drink it and you automatically go, okay, this is Pappy 15. It's absolutely phenomenal. What a great bourbon. Holy cow, I love this. But take other labels. I've had friends who say they love a particular bourbon. It's better than this. And I go, it's not. They go, it absolutely is. But they're forming that opinion based on the front of the bottle, the label on the bottle, because everybody says it has to be great. And when I do them, these friends in a blind with another bourbon that I think is better, I'll be honest, I've only done it about, 6 or 7 times to a couple different friends. But every time they end up picking the bourbon that, well, let me say it this way. The bourbon that they like and think is great, they don't end up picking as their favorite in that blind. It always loses. So my point is that the front of the label psychologically has this influence on us that it has to be great. And I think whiskey dinners kind of, somebody telling you these pours with, I'm not questioning that the pour on its own is great. It probably is. I'm not questioning the food on its own is great. It probably is. Putting them together is not a good thing. I don't know of anybody who's ever going to say, let's have lasagna and a pot of coffee tonight. Doesn't make sense, right? Just like whiskey and dinners don't make sense. They just don't. So that's my public service announcement for this episode. I just had to get on here and vent a little bit that I'm seeing so many of these. I see people signing up and spending hundreds of dollars to go to these whiskey dinners in which they're being told they're going to have this great experience of how food and whiskey paired together can give you this unique kind of wonderful experience. And it's just a bunch of crap is what it is. And I just wanted to get on here and let everybody know. The rant for this week is over, everybody. We will see you on next week's episode. Thank you for listening. Go have a pour before dinner, cook a nice meal, enjoy some wine with that nice meal. We'll see you guys on the next one.